Sir, when folks are in the position I was in, where you have unfiled returns, you have unpaid taxes, you need to resolve these tax issues. There is vulnerability. You asked me how I felt. That's one of the primary emotions. You feel very vulnerable. And there's something about reaching out to Peter Stephan and the Tax Resolution Institute and your team there is you almost, I'm putting this the right way, I feel like you sort of know what the enemy's thinking. You know with who I don't know who I'm dealing with. Really, I had never had in my adult life that sort of relationship with the IRS, with the Franchise Tax Board. I had always sort of done my thing. They had done theirs. I had filed my returns, and we had our transactions. But then when they get, when they get their hair up, you feel this vulnerability. But there is serenity, again, to use that word, in kind of knowing that Peter knows who we're calling here. You know what makes these agents tick. You know what makes these revenue officers tick. And you can come at them from a position that obviously the average guy like me doesn't understand because we don't know.
Well, that's a good comment, Brian. And the reason I say that is we know exactly what they're going to request before we pick up the phone to call them, because we've contacted the service center. We've determined what returns are unfiled. We've obtained tax return transcripts to determine that. We've obtained wage and income transcripts if returns haven't been filed, and those wage and income transcripts are the ones that show what the IRS knows. Mm-hmm. Did you get a 1099? Did you get a W-2? Do you have mortgage interest that was reported?
So the playing field's leveled. You know what the IRS knows. You know what Sacramento knows.
That's correct. And then from there, we know exactly what they're going to request. And furthermore, at the end of the day, there aren't that many variations of how to solve the tax problem. The question is how you approach it, mm-hmm. and how you and how your relationship is with the revenue officer or officers, or generally with the IRS. Sometimes, and this will be very interesting to you. Can I tell a story?
Absolutely.
Several years ago, a woman called me and said my soon-to-be ex-husband just got his bank account levied for $37,000, and he's going to kill me. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, well, I'd like to get the money put back in the bank account. Sure. And I said, well, let me ask you a few questions. I said, do you need it to make payroll? No. Did they turn the electricity off in your house? No. Do you have a foreclosure notice? No. Mm-hmm. And so none of these things that I could use to persuade the IRS to put the money back in the account were there. I said, I can try to do this for you, but I'm telling you, I'm not that optimistic. So rather than sending me a full retainer, send me half a retainer, and I'll get on this immediately. And she did. And so I called the IRS. I called automated collections, and they owed more than $37,000. It just happened that they will take everything in your bank account. Wow. So I called automated collections, and they said, no, there's no way we're putting that money back in his bank account. So I hung up and I called again. They said, no, there's no way we're putting that money back in his bank account. And so I picked up the phone and called a third time. And I heard a blink on the other end. And the woman came back on the phone after checking with her supervisor and said, well, we would do it, but she didn't file her 2000 and whatever year it was return. And I said, but it's on extension. And she said, because it was September or so, and mm-hmm. October is the extension date for individual returns. And so she said, well, no, she didn't extend the return. I said, well, how can we do this?
Right.
Well, if she files the return by Tuesday, we'll put the money back in the account, which was surprising, one surprise after the next.
A little light at the end of the tunnel here.
So I'm real happy about that, and I make sure that I have the person's name and ID number and so on and so forth, and I call the taxpayer and say, we need to get this return filed right away. Do you have somebody that files the returns for you? Because at that time, 5 or 6 or 8 years ago, I felt like I didn't want to steal the return from their CPA, uh-huh. and like that.
Right.
So she said yes, and by the way, this is the last time I let someone else control the process. That's why we now prepare all the returns. Almost insist on it, because we control the process. So anyway, on Monday I call her, and I say, "Do you have your tax return? I want to get that $37,000 put back in your bank account." And she says, "No." And I said, "What do you mean no? You said you'd have it today.
Right.
If we file it today, we'll get that $37,000 back."
Quite a motivator.
Quite a motivator. And she says, "Oh, it doesn't matter. They put it back in my account on Friday."
Oh, wow.
And so you never know what's going to happen. And in this case, the third time was a charm.
Wow. I'd like to call that the $37,000 story.
Yeah.